Good morning or afternoon to you guys, depending on when you're watching this. But today is April 2nd, um, Thursday. We will be having a Zoom meeting today at 2 o'clock. I will post that link back out on Classroom along with this lecture here. Thank you guys for tuning in. Since we're having the Zoom meeting, and again, it won't be long, it'll kind of be a, asking, checking, make sure everybody's where they need to be and um, all that. We can even have a question of the day if you guys want to. But I'll try and keep this lecture brief. So let's just get into it. We are picking up with in the mid-1950s, the Montgomery bus boycott. So here's I'm big on how fragile history can be, or just events in general can be. And what I mean by that is one seemingly small change to an event can have this massive effect on the outcome and on how we view history, the butterfly effect. So let me take you back to 1955. An African-American woman is on a bus in Montgomery, a public bus. And back then, buses were, they were, as well as everything else in Montgomery, Alabama, they're segregated. But the system in which this is segregated in is the first 8 rows. So let's see if I can count this right. A public bus has 32 rows. The first 8 rows are white only. And then the back 8 rows are black only. Now the middle 16 rows are just whatever's left. You know, if one of the sections fills up, if either the front 8 or the back 8 are full, then the middle 16 is where the spillover is. Now, if there's more than 8 white people on the bus, or more than 8 seats full, then white people would just extend their rows back. If there's more than 8 black people on the bus in the back, then they just extend their rows up, basically meeting right in the middle. That was kind of that was a law on the book, so that's a de jure segregation. But if, let's say, there's quite a few white people on the bus and they fill up all the way through the 16, if there's more people on, then the African Americans have to stand. So white people were not to stand, they were to always have a seat, no matter what. Now, this hypothetical that I talked about, let's go back to 1955. A woman sits in the middle section, in the spillover section. She sits in the middle section, but she sits in the front seat of that section. Now, when she sits there, the white section is not full. After a while, the white section becomes full, and her seat is the next one back. So a white person who is standing basically stands over her and says, "You're in my seat," and she doesn't move. And the bus driver gets out of his seat and goes back and tells her to move. She refuses. She's arrested. Now, this event that I'm speaking of happens in March of 1955. You'll notice on these notes here that I included that Rosa Parks got arrested in December of 1955. The story I'm telling is of a woman named Claudette Colvin. Claudette Colvin gets arrested, and all these civil rights organizations rush to her side and interview her and ask her questions and evaluate the movement, her case, basically. Now, Claudette Colvin is 15 years old, unmarried, and pregnant. And the civil rights unions come to the agreement that she is not the best face to put on this movement. They agree that she will not be the positive spin on this that they need, so they stand down. 9 months later, Rosa Parks does the exact same thing. Rosa Parks was a nurse in World War II. She is married, has a steady job, is respected in the community, and a very charismatic young preacher in Montgomery, Alabama, steps to the forefront and becomes the voice of the civil rights movement. And that young preacher was Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an up-and-comer. He was very new to the scene. This was his first action. He was not ready before. If Claudette Colvin is not 15 or is not pregnant or unmarried when she is arrested, then Martin Luther King is just some preacher you've never heard of from Montgomery. But that was not the case. King steps up. This goes to court. This becomes the motivation for the Montgomery bus boycotts. So buses were a very popular mode of transportation in the public, and many people use them to get around the city. Montgomery is a decent-sized city. So African Americans and few white people that were in support of the civil rights movement or of this movement boycotted. They stopped paying to use the buses. They found other ways. They carpool, or they just walk, which was dangerous. They often got beat up or abducted or even murdered. Or they would, get rides from sympathetic white people with vehicles. This boycott lasts for 381 days, and it has such an impact on the economy in Montgomery. 80 to 85% of all bus riders in Montgomery were African American. So they're essentially losing 80 to 85% of their business. And finally, they give in. And in the process, the Supreme Court rules that segregated buses are unconstitutional. So the boycott ends, and the rules, the social rules, didn't really change that much. Not many African Americans felt safe sitting in the front. They still felt susceptible, and they still felt like they could be attacked. So most of them still sat in the back for many, many years after. But it did lead to further advancement of civil rights. The civil rights movement does not end with the desegregation of buses, and it was never meant to. This was just the kickoff, the starting point, or I guess not start, a continuation of Brown versus Board. Now schools are desegregated and buses. So the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, that was a civil rights group created by Martin Luther King. They were the ones that sponsored the Montgomery bus boycott. And They're they provided support in the form of money and motivation and really just a place to congregate. You know, this turns into completely uh, religious based or led by the churches, because that's what Martin Luther King was, a preacher. So he was using his influence as a preacher to further this movement, and that was controversial at the time. Some preachers were uncomfortable with the fact that he was um, involving religion in this, because this kind of seems like a gray area, mixing societal problems with religion. But he hung with it. He was arrested multiple times for many of the protests that he participated in, along with many other people. But he stood strong and continued the movement. Now, in the face of this rapid change, there was a lot of violent retaliation from white people. Churches were bombed. Houses were shot up. There were cases of white people just sitting on rooftops waiting for an African American to walk by with a gun. It was a very nasty. This was, as I'm sure you're aware, this was not a seamless transition. This entire event, or this entire movement, was met with tons of violence. I mean, they led a march in, oh shoot, what town? Might have been Montgomery March. They led a march through town, African Americans, just peaceful. They were worried it would lead to rioting or brutality, but it was relatively peaceful to start with. Thousands of African Americans in Montgomery marched through the streets, stopping traffic, just walking in unison as one. Elementary school children, African American children, got out of school and participated. College students left class and participated. And this was met with the police chief of the town, Bull Connor, a white segregationalist, who decided to take action against them and turn fire hoses onto the protesters. News cameras had live feed to TVs all over the country of children 10, 11, 12 years old being attacked by police dogs and shot with fire hoses. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen water coming out of a fire hose. It is powerful. And it hurts. I mean, I haven't been hit by it, but you can just tell by seeing it. It is a powerful stream of water. You feel like you're drowning being hit by this water. The water probably breaks skin too, because it's coming out at such speed. This was brutality. And as terrible as it was for the protesters, in the long run, it helped their movement. People on TV saw this, and it changed some minds. The brutality that they were faced with, and the fact that they never retaliated. These specifically, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the NAACP, those peaceful conferences, they never retaliated violently. And they earned a lot of people's respect and support because of it. So, I don't know why this is, oh, that wasn't right. I'm trying to get rid of that bottom bar. And these nonviolent protests were based on the writings of a man named Henry David Thoreau many years ago, and then Mohandas Gandhi, was a follower of Thoreau. He was a reader of Thoreau, and then Gandhi, as I mentioned yesterday, was using those methods himself in India 10 years before this. So Martin Luther King was inspired by these men, as were the rest of the nonviolent protesters. And as I said before, this was a Christian-themed organization, and that's where a lot of this nonviolence and morality in their protest came from. So I told you this is going to be a shorter lecture. I talked plenty, but the notes themselves weren't terribly long. Today's essential question is really simple. What city and state did Rosa Parks refuse her bus seat to a white man? Real simple. It's the first note you took today. So that should be a short and sweet answer. You will add that to the document that you have been posting the questions on. And that should make four questions and answers. We have, like I said, mandatory Zoom meeting 2 o'clock today. So tune in. I just want to touch base with everybody. Man, there's still a couple that haven't answered any of the questions, or at least haven't done it so I can see. So please join in, touch base. We'll get this taken care of. That'll do it. I will see you guys later. Have a wonderful day.